that what the insiders wanted was a Bush-Clinton dynasty. And it was so orchestrated, it was so obvious when she ran for Senate that it was just a transitional step to be president. And what it would do is it would basically keep the monarchy going, because you basically have George Bush Sr., who was running the CIA, and then became, he was on advisory boards for other presidents. And then when Reagan was president, he basically was the de facto president. Reagan was just an actor, for God's sake. And he just read his lines and was very convincing, but he didn't know what was really going on. And the reason why they brought Reagan in was that he was exceptionally willing to rat out other people to the CIA back when he was an actor, and they said, okay, this is a guy who's willing to do whatever we ask him to do because of his patriotism. Which, again, it's not like he's a bad guy. He thought he was doing the right thing by ratting people out. Mm-hmm. So they brought him in, and he didn't know very much, so he was the puppet. George Bush Sr. was the guy really running the show. So he ran the country for 8 years under Reagan. Then he gets reelected after Reagan, runs the country for 4 more years. By this point, you've had 12 years of Bush literally running the country as the de facto president. People get tired of him. They get pissed off at him. They don't like him anymore. You pull a switcheroo on him. You bring in the other guy, Clinton, which is basically the same team, more or less. They're working for the same people. During the time that Clinton was president, you had a big falling out between the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. And remember now, if you look at the people who are on the board of directors as the controlling members of the Federal Reserve System, you got Rockefellers and Rothschilds. So this whole idea that they split off into neighboring factions didn't even really happen until 1996, which was right around Clinton's presidency, being elected and all that. That's around the time that happened. So because he was in for... Did Clinton have 4 years or 8 years? I'm trying to remember now. No, it was 8 years, right, because I remember I went to college in 1991, and he won the election while I was in college. So that was 1992 that he became president. And so he had 2 terms. He was in for 8 years, and it was in 1996, halfway through his full presidency, that there was a major murder of one of the Rothschilds. And I believe this was the case where he was found hung on his towel rack in the bathroom. So it's almost like an insult, clearly being set up to look like a fake suicide. And from what I've heard from Ray Ellen, this woman who runs Rumor Mill News Radio, I've been on her show a bunch of times, this was basically a major falling out between the Rockefeller and the Rothschild factions, in which one of the top Rothschilds was killed. And it was at this time that you really started to get a bifurcation within the so-called Illuminati between the American side and the Rothschild side. Now, the American side is the side that's the neocons and the Republican Party, and the Rothschild side was the Democratic Party. Now, up until then, they did run these respective political parties on their own, but it didn't matter really which one won because they both were on the same team ultimately, and it was just order out of chaos. You play both sides against the middle. But then around this time in 1996 is when you actually started to get a schism between the groups, and they no longer agreed with each other on some of the basic things. So that didn't happen until recently. But nonetheless, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. So even in 2000, when the schism had started to form, George Bush Jr., which is probably guided by his father, I'll bet you George Sr. is the one that had to do with this, creates a rug for the Oval Office that has 44 symbols in it, not 43, symbolizing the president that comes after George W., which is the president that leads us into 2012. The whole daggone thing was orchestrated for Hillary to become president. And you have to learn this and get past all this mind control that's being written as what appear to be articles by independently minded thinkers who are anti-Obama. And what's happened is there's so much propaganda out there, and it's so easy to read. All you have to do is go to these websites, and every day there's more. You're reading stuff that is being written right in the offices of the Pentagon and the NSA. They're writing it right from their typewriter into your head. You're reading their propaganda, and you're believing it. And a lot of people I'm talking to right now, this is what's happening to you. Now you're attacking me and saying that I'm full of shit when in fact, this is what's happening to you. You're actually reading stuff that's not true. And what I've done systematically is I've gone through and showed point after point after point after point of how this administration is completely demolishing the whole Illuminati New World Order power structure. They're going after everything. The very first thing that Obama did when he got into office with his administration is to deconstruct the lockage that had been formed around the Freedom of Information Act. Bush had been making it impossible for any of this stuff to go public. They were classifying information that really shouldn't have been classified because it was so stupid. You have his administration is going after credit card companies. They're going after the regulatory bodies. In fact, I found I just got an iPhone the other day, and for the first time, and I was at the barber getting my hair done, and I was, surfing the net while I was getting my hair cut, and I found an article on Financial Times in which I think I actually still have it loaded here. Let me see if I can pull it up on this little machine. The article was in Financial Times, and what it was doing is it was defending the Federal Reserve by saying that whatever Obama is trying to create would be much worse. Let's see if I got it here. Federal comment editorial. Here it is.
Okay. It
says, Central Bankers Strike Back. This is Financial Times. That's the title. June 19th, 2009. Let's see here. Talk of green shoots inevitably tempers the shock of last year's financial crisis when Wall Street's finest were falling like ninepins. But the need for thorough regulatory reform is still pressing. That's something everybody can agree on. One concern stands out, the risk of the whole financial system breaking down as it did last autumn. Controlling systemic risk is the most important goal of regulatory reform. Everything else is secondary. Now check this out, man. I mean, you want to hear propaganda? You want to hear what the guys this is proof that the Obama administration is being opposed by the most powerful forces. It's right here in this article. Those who want to give central banks, which is the Federal Reserve, right? Those who want to give central banks the power and responsibility to monitor systemic risks are right. They include the U.S. Treasury, whose proposals this week seek to turn the Federal Reserve into a systemic super regulator, meaning the Federal Reserve will have even more power than it does now, can control the financial system even more than it already does, and has the power to destroy other systems and other banks and other corporations with nothing more than the stroke of a pen. Then it goes on.
But this is not true at all.
What's that?
This isn't true at all.
No, it would be a terrible thing. It would be a terrible thing.
But did Obama do that?
No, this is what I'm saying is this is going against Obama. You got to let me finish the article. Listen to this.
Okay.
Mervyn King, the Bank of England's governor, called for similar powers. So now you got the Illuminati English bank, the English Federal Reserve, saying, yeah, that'd be great. Let's have more regulatory power. Now listen to this. It gets even better. These proposals are being contested. They should not be. The alternatives are worse. Now check this out. Members of the U.S. Congress want systemic risk to be supervised by a new council of regulatory agencies. Now I'm going to stop right there before we read any more. Members of the U.S. Congress want systemic risk, that means the entire system, to be supervised by a new council of regulatory agencies. All these bills are saying get rid of the Federal Reserve. In fact, that's the whole plan, is to get rid of the Federal Reserve. The new regulatory agencies, guess what, are not going to be controlled by the Illuminati, not going to be controlled by the New World Order. They're going to get rid of these ridiculous derivatives, and they're actually going to bring the system back to a functional level. So what do these guys have to do? They have to write propaganda in mainstream sources like Financial Times to try to go against it. So let me read a little more. Members of the U.S. Congress want systemic risk to be supervised by a new council of regulatory agencies. But, as Lawrence Summers, U.S. Economic Council Director, has said, collective responsibility often leads to no responsibility. So now what they're saying is, well, if Congress is in charge of it and they create new agencies and they're collectively responsible, then they're just going to kind of drop the ball and forget about it, and then there will be no oversight. No single agency is as well suited. Now, this is so bullshit. Listen to this. You're going to groan when I say this. I'm just reading it now. No single agency is as well suited to secure overall financial stability as a central bank, with its power to create liquidity. That, not monetary policy, was the Fed's original purpose. The solution is not perfect. One may legitimately worry that a double mandate, monetary policy and financial stability, weakens the ability to fulfill either very well. These tasks, however, could be complementary. Excessive liquidity can inflate balance sheets as easily as prices. So now they're basically saying, hey, let's let the Federal Reserve print as much money as it wants. Let's let them control the entire financial system even more than they already do, because they already create the money, so let's let them do everything. Things are more complicated, and it goes on. Things are more complicated in the European Union, whose integrated financial markets are not matched by cross-border fiscal or regulatory authority or monetary authority outside the euro area. The best that can be hoped for is the adoption of Jacques de Larosière's blueprint, which calls for an EU-wide systemic risk council with binding arbitration power over disagreeing national regulators. Europe must not remain exposed to the failure of banks with balance sheets larger than their home country's economies. Banks too large to fail are... Let's see if we got to get to the next thing because this is going to take too much time. Reforms to rein... This is the last paragraph. Reforms to rein in systemic risk must not now fall prey to politics. They must be enacted before the memory of last autumn fades. So what you have here literally is a blatant attack against everything the Obama administration is doing, promoting the idea that we not only should keep the Federal Reserve, but that it needs all this new power in order to do its job better and save the world from financial discomfort.
Okay, let me stop you for a sec.
Yeah.
We've got one of our listeners is saying that yesterday Obama did make the Fed the ultimate regulator. Did you hear that? Or is that misinformation?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
So that's something we have to check out.
You have to understand, here's the thing. One of the things that the Obama administration has been doing, which I said in my last blog, is they will say things that are outrageous specifically to get people to have an uprising. When Obama does this speech in front of the Muslim world, he's addressing 1.5 billion people. Now, whether you agree with him or not, whether you think he's a good guy or a bad guy, the effect that it had on those Muslim people was that they felt a sense of uplifting gratitude that they finally had been heard. And whether he was doing it for the truth or whether it was just, if he is a puppet, I sure as hell never saw that policy happening from the Bush administration. They have spent hundreds of billions of dollars, arguably, in propaganda money, building up the Muslim world as the ultimate evil. Just like they did in the Cold War with the Russians, where, if you remember on television, Russian women were portrayed as if they were 350 pounds overweight, and they had big, fat, hairy hands, and they're all like, they're all wearing these gray outfits and mopping, and they're like non-people, and so if we nuke them, it doesn't matter. That's what they tried to get the American people to think. Well, now you have the same thing done to the Muslims, in which we're supposed to think that anybody that follows the Quran is following a religion that automatically tells them you must kill all infidels.
Right.
And that may be some of what you can find in the Quran. That is possible that that's in there. But there's also a lot about the Quran that is actually talking about peace and service, and that's one of the bigger meta messages that comes out in the Quran. You can read any Bible, any religious scripture, and find stuff that's negative. There's lots of stuff in the Bible that's pretty nasty, especially in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
You can justify any violence with the Bible you want to. So the thing is also, I've been to Arabic countries. I was in Egypt, and I actually made a strange mistake, which was not really a mistake, but I needed to get on the Internet. And I walked away from the tourist area to try to find a place where we could find Internet access, and I'm with a female friend of mine who's a very beautiful woman, blonde and, looks like a model. And here we are walking in the middle of Egypt in a non-tourist area trying to find an Internet cafe. And all of a sudden I see this big crowd of Egyptian Muslim teenage boys. And I have, 5 years of martial arts training from high school. That's when I was taking that. And it's a kung fu style that I learned called Pange Noon. And so it's, for those who are transcribing, it's P-A-N-G-A-I-N-O-O-N. And anyway, you learn how to, one of the things you learn is to look for uniforms, as it's called, and that means a uniform is sort of like it could be the way somebody is dressed, but it also has to do with the state of mind that they hold.